Science is really competitive, and I think that's probably more true today than it ever has been before. The number of people who go from doing a PhD to finally securing a permanent position in academia is something like 10 or 20%. It depends on the discipline. There's lots of different statistics online, but it's something like this. Now, a good proportion of those people might decide that they want to do something else, but I'm sure there's a lot of very good people as well who would really like to have a permanent position in academia, but just feel like it's too much work for them. They don't want to move between multiple cities, perhaps multiple countries, doing postdoc to postdoc to postdoc before they can finally settle down. At an age, usually, where they're trying to build relationships, maybe start a family. This competition means that if you want to get a good postdoc, and if you eventually want to land a permanent position in academia, you need to have a really good record of publishing papers. And this has led to there being more papers published today than there ever has been before. And I think there's lots of good reasons why this is not good for the progress we're making as a scientific community. I'm a data manager. I talk about data on this channel, so I'm going to stay in my lane and talk about how this pressure to publish papers is holding back how we're publishing data, and furthermore, how this is holding back the progress we're making as a scientific community. We data managers are trying to convince people to publish data as soon as possible, ideally as soon as the data have been collected, analyzed, and quality controlled. As soon as the data are ready to publish, they should be published so that people can reuse them. It's hard to argue against this being good for science as a whole. The strongest argument I hear against this is that people are worried that if they publish their data early, before they've published some paper based on those data, that someone else is going to take those data and publish an analysis based on their data before they've had chance to do so themselves. This is a valid concern, and this is something we have to take seriously. I think the chances of this happening are probably overstated, but nevertheless, I have heard cases of this happening, and we need to do something about this. Particularly if you're an early career researcher and you want this good record of publishing papers, it's really important that someone doesn't publish that analysis before you get the chance to. But I believe that generally speaking, people are good. Most people are good. I don't think there's a lot of academics out there swimming around like sharks, waiting for some early career researcher to publish their data so they can go and take them, analyze their data, and jeopardize their project. I don't think many people watching this video will identify themselves as one of these sharks, but because this does happen, I think there must be a lack of understanding of how people should behave when they use someone else's data. There's the legal considerations, but also there's the ethical standards that we should try and adhere to when we use someone else's data. So let's go through the legal stuff first. Data should be published with a data usage license. If you're using the data and you don't follow that license, this is a big deal. The data creator can potentially sue you. Now, this is of course serious, but don't be too scared by this. Data usage licenses are usually clear and easy for someone to follow. The most common license you'll see is a Creative Commons license, version 4.0, and this means that you can go and use someone's data freely, but you have to credit them for that use. This means that if you're writing a paper and you've used some data, you need to include a citation to that dataset in your references list alongside any papers that you've referenced. Many journals will also require you to include something in the data availability statement, so you should do this as well, but the most important is that you include it in the references list. There are other licenses available. There's the Creative Commons non-commercial license, for example, which means you can't use the data for commercial use, anything where you're going to earn money. I'd usually recommend that you don't use this licenses because commercial ventures can include lots of different things. Science communication, where you've got a paid subscription, for example. So not all commercial ventures are bad. So only use this when you really think you want to protect your data. But these licenses alone, they don't really protect you from someone else publishing that paper before you've had a chance to publish that paper. And this is where the ethical considerations come into play. If you want to use someone's data, particularly if they've been relatively recently published, you should be contacting them and stating how you want to use those data. So send them an email, let them know what you plan to do. If they're interested in similar data to you, then perhaps they're working in a similar field. This could be a good networking opportunity, and perhaps this can even lead to some collaboration. They might provide more insights in the data. They might have more similar data that is useful for you as well. They might have some different ideas on how to use those data, and perhaps you can work together on creating that paper. You, as the data provider, shouldn't expect to be a co-author on that paper just because you've provided the data. Remember, you've already got your authorship on the paper. This is a separate publication, and the people who are authors on the paper should only be people who have been involved in writing and working on that paper. If the data provider says, no, you can't use these data, I'm working on them right now, you should absolutely respect their wishes and move on. But I think the chances of that person wanting to do exactly the same thing that you've been wanting to do with those data are quite small, and most likely this will lead to some positive experiences rather than negative ones. I think having this dialogue between data users and data providers is really important. It can help build trust between the two. But of course, it takes time to build trust, and it'll take time before it's commonplace for people to publish data early, and it will take time before these best practices on how to behave when you're using data become commonplace. I'm going to keep talking about this, and hopefully people will share this message and talk about it themselves. And only by doing that can we change the culture of data usage. In the meantime, people are going to keep holding on to those data. But it can be years between the time that the data are ready and the time that you've finally got around to publishing that paper. I know people who've been sitting on data, potentially important data, for more than a decade waiting to publish that paper. They might never publish that paper. They might retire or leave academia for a variety of different reasons. And then what happens to the data? They're gone. I think this is a travesty. Most scientific data are publicly funded, and therefore we have an obligation to make them publicly available as soon as possible. If we accept that important research can be done based on these data, then if we're holding back those data for 2 or 3 years, then we're holding back that research too. And all this comes back to the competition that we started this video with. The system rewards people who are publishing papers, publishing lots of papers, and it doesn't reward people who are publishing their data. In fact, it probably actively discourages people from it because it's in their interest to hold on to their data and make sure that they are the ones publishing that paper. So it's in rewarding people who are putting themselves first and putting scientific progress second. This has to change. We need to reward those people who are publishing their data, who are publishing their data openly, who are publishing their data early, and who are publishing their data in line with the FAIR principles to maximize the chances that those data can be reused. We need to reward them on job applications. We need to reward them on funding applications. There are also things that funding bodies can do to encourage people to publish their data earlier. We're seeing that some funding bodies require you to have a data management plan. This is good because it encourages you to think about exactly when you're going to publish the data, where you're going to publish them, what format you're going to use, and who's going to be responsible for that. And I've heard some speculation that some funding bodies are considering holding back a small proportion of their funding until those data are published. Remember that the funding bodies want you to publish your data. They want you to publish your data early because they want to maximize the impact of the research that they're funding. So that's all for this one. I hope you found this interesting. Let's work together to build an academic system that rewards collaboration and is built on trust. I'll see you next time.